I forgave my wife's infidelity, after she claimed it was one mistake. 2 years later, I discovered the full truth. Now I feel like a fool. My wife, Ella, 32, and I, 35, have been together for 7 years, married for 5. 2 years ago, she admitted to cheating on me with a coworker. I had always believed that cheating was a red line for me, and I was initially determined to divorce her. However, she did the work to regain my trust, or so I believed at the time. I also factored in the following, which allowed me to eventually move past it and forgive her. She confessed to me voluntarily. She wasn't found out and forced to tell me. It was one time at a housewarming party with the coworker. I remember that night. She didn't return home until 4 a.m., and I sent her several texts checking in to see if she was okay and if she needed me to pick her up. She normally doesn't like to drink, but occasionally succumbs to peer pressure, so I was worried she might have been too drunk to drive. She quit her job after confessing to me. This was her own choice to prove that she was prepared to hold herself to better boundaries. I actually discouraged her at the time because I was set on divorcing her and was concerned that her lack of a job would mean I would need to pay higher alimony if she was unemployed. When I was 19 years old, I also cheated on my then-girlfriend, not Ella, via a drunken kiss. Obviously, it wasn't as bad as what Ella did, which was full-on intercourse, but part of me felt like a hypocrite for not being able to forgive Ella, because my college girlfriend had forgiven me. Given the above, and the fact that Ella genuinely seemed remorseful, everything else in our relationship was great, and she was the most compatible person I had ever dated personality-wise. I decided to forgive Ella and not divorce her on the condition that she signed a post-nup. She enthusiastically agreed. The post-nup isn't overly harsh in my opinion. Aside from affirming that our premarital assets won't go into the settlement in the event of a divorce, it also included an infidelity clause with the penalty of the cheater forfeiting our jointly owned home, the car, and alimony in the event of a divorce. The balance would also be split 60-40 in favor of the cheated spouse rather than 50-50. We both had independent legal advice when this was drafted and signed. Fast forward to last month when I was contacted on Facebook by Alice, the wife of my wife's affair partner. She had tracked me down by going through Ella's social media. She told me that she had caught her husband, Bill, cheating on her, and discovered their affair from 2 years ago after going through his electronic devices. She asked if I knew, to which I replied that I did, but I thanked her for telling me anyway. She asked what had happened between Ella and me, and I told her that we had reconciled. She said she was determined to divorce Bill because, unlike my wife, Bill had proven to be a serial cheater and never confessed to her. The part that has since changed my mind about forgiving Ella is the fact that she revealed that Bill and Ella had actually been having an affair for 5 months. I clarified if she meant an emotional affair, but she clarified that it was a physical affair and that they had hooked up over 10 times. In my mind, this makes the affair so much worse. It wasn't just a drunken night, it was a long period of planned and deliberate choices, and I feel like an absolute fool. This past weekend I confronted Ella, and she admitted it. I asked why she didn't tell me the full truth, and she said she didn't believe I would have forgiven her if I had known. She's been trying to convince me that it's in the past. We've made 2 years of progress since, and it doesn't matter whether it was once or 10 times. She argues that her confession showed true remorse. But my current thought is that the omission shows that even in her confession, her main concern was protecting herself rather than respecting me as a spouse by giving me the agency to make a fully informed choice, not that different from never telling me in the first place. I am now strongly considering divorce again and relying on the prenup for a more favorable divorce settlement. She wants us to go back to couples therapy, but how would that even work now that I trust her even less than I did 2 years ago? Update 1. When I first confronted Ella about her 5-month affair, I felt like my entire world had collapsed. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where we had shared so many meals and conversations, and yet the distance between us felt insurmountable. She sat across from me, her eyes swollen from crying, her hands clasped tightly together. She didn't try to deny it, not anymore. After Alice contacted me and revealed that Ella and Bill had been sleeping together for months, there was no point in hiding it. "I didn't think you would forgive me if you knew," Ella had said, her voice breaking as she spoke. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I was so scared of losing you." I felt numb listening to her. How could she still call it a mistake? It wasn't a single drunken night as she had originally claimed. It was months of sneaking around, lying to my face every day while pretending that everything was fine between us. It wasn't just the cheating that hurt, it was the constant deceit. I had lived with this woman for years, trusting her, believing that she was being honest with me, and all the while she was hiding this huge betrayal. After our confrontation, things between us were strained. Ella was desperate to fix things, but I didn't know if there was anything left to fix. She suggested we go back to couples therapy, that it had helped us before, and maybe it could help again. But this time felt different. 2 years ago, I had thought that her confession was the hardest part, that we could move past it because she had been honest with me. Now, I realized that she had only told me what she thought would keep me from leaving, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been manipulated into staying. I agreed to one session, not because I thought it would help, but because I needed to understand why she thought this was salvageable. We met with our therapist, and the session felt like an exercise in futility. Ella talked about how much she regretted her actions, how she had worked so hard to regain my trust, and how she believed we could still make this work. The therapist asked questions, trying to guide us through the conversation, but I could barely focus on the words being exchanged. Then, the therapist asked something that stopped me cold. Ella, do you believe there is anything else that your husband should know about? Any other details you've withheld? Ella hesitated for a moment, just long enough for me to know that there was more. My heart sank as she began to speak. There was one more thing, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After I confessed the first time, I did meet with Bill once more. It was a few weeks after we started therapy, before we signed the post-nup. I didn't sleep with him again, but we met for coffee, and I don't know why I did it. I just needed closure or something. I stared at her in disbelief. She had met with him again? After we had already started rebuilding our marriage? After we had agreed to move forward together? My hands clenched into fists as I struggled to control my anger. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked, my voice shaking with frustration. I didn't think it was important, she replied, tears streaming down her face. It was just one meeting and nothing happened. I didn't want to hurt you any more than I already had. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She had decided, once again, what I could and couldn't handle. She had taken away my ability to make an informed decision about our future, just like she had done 2 years ago. I left the therapy session feeling more confused and betrayed than ever. That night, I slept in the guest room. I couldn't even stand to be near her. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Bill together, laughing over coffee, sharing more secrets that I wasn't a part of. The betrayal was too much to bear, and I started to seriously consider what divorce would look like for me. The post-nup we signed would protect me financially, but emotionally? I didn't know if I was ready to walk away just yet. The following days were tense. Ella gave me space, but she didn't stop trying to convince me that we could still work things out. She kept bringing up the fact that we had made it through 2 years after the affair, that we had rebuilt so much together. But to me, it didn't feel like we had rebuilt anything. It felt like I had been living in a house made of lies, and now, with the truth out in the open, that house was crumbling around me. Then, something happened that shook me to my core. One evening, while I was sitting in the living room, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Alice. I hadn't spoken to her since our initial conversation, but now she was reaching out again. I thought you should know, her message began. I found more messages between Bill and Ella. They were still talking after you forgave her. My heart stopped. I quickly typed back, asking for more details. Alice explained that she had been going through Bill's old phone records and discovered a series of texts between him and Ella from about a year ago. According to her, the messages weren't romantic, but they were far too friendly for comfort. Ella had been texting him, asking how he was doing, reminiscing about their time together, even joking about their bad decisions. I felt sick to my stomach. How many more lies had I been told? How much more had she hidden from me? It wasn't just the cheating anymore. It was the continued betrayal, the constant deception. I felt like I was unraveling, like everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. That night, I confronted Ella again. I showed her the messages, and at first she denied it, claiming that they were just old texts that didn't mean anything. But I couldn't believe her anymore. Every word that came out of her mouth felt like another layer of deceit, and I realized that I couldn't live like this anymore. I want a divorce, I said, my voice cold and steady. Ella's face crumpled and she fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged me to reconsider, to give her one more chance. But I was done. There was no more trust left, no more love, only the hollow shell of what once was. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but I knew it was the right one. I couldn't keep living in a marriage built on lies. Ella had made her choices, and now I was making mine. As I signed the papers, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the life we had lost, but relief that I was finally free from the constant betrayal. It was time to start over, time to find peace. Update 2. After I told Ella I wanted a divorce, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. The once warm, familiar space now felt cold and foreign. Ella moved into the guest room permanently, and we barely spoke to each other. It was painful, and not just because of the betrayal. It was the end of a chapter I had invested so much in, and I could feel the weight of that loss crushing me with each passing day. I officially filed for divorce 2 weeks after our last argument. I remember handing the paperwork to Ella. She took it without saying a word, her eyes red and puffy from the endless crying. For the first time in our marriage, she looked completely defeated. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would feel. I felt hollow, like something vital had been taken from me, even though I had been the one to initiate this process. It wasn't just a breakup. It was the dismantling of a life we had built together. Ella continued to ask if we could talk, but I kept my distance. The trust was gone, and I had no interest in reliving the same conversations over and over again. Every time I thought about giving her a chance to explain herself further, I remembered the lies, the months of deception, the secret meetings, and the texts she never told me about. No explanation would make that better. No amount of tears or remorse could undo what had already been done. The legal process began to unfold, and for the most part it was straightforward thanks to the post-nup. I kept the house, the car, and most of our joint assets. Ella, now unemployed since she had quit her job to prove her remorse 2 years ago, didn't contest the terms. It was a relatively clean break, at least financially. But emotionally? That was another story. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a new bombshell dropped that left me questioning everything I had ever known about our marriage. One evening, a few days after Ella had been served the divorce papers, I got another message from Alice. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to put the whole ordeal behind me, but curiosity got the better of me. "I've been doing some more digging," the message began. "I don't know if this will help you, but I found something you need to see." She sent me a series of screenshots, emails between Bill and Ella dated nearly 3 years ago, a full year before her original confession. In the emails, they talked about meeting up, planning their next rendezvous, and discussing how careful they had to be so that neither of their spouses would find out. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the messages. These weren't just emails from the 5-month affair that Ella had admitted to. These were from a year prior. The affair had started long before she ever told me. This wasn't a brief lapse in judgment. This wasn't just 5 months of poor choices. This was years of calculated betrayal, hidden behind a facade of love and loyalty. I sat there in shock, my mind reeling from the implications. Ella hadn't just cheated on me once, or even for 5 months. She had been having an affair for years, all while pretending to be the remorseful wife who wanted to fix our marriage. The woman who sat across from me in therapy, who had cried and begged for forgiveness, who had sworn she would never lie to me again, had been lying the entire time. I didn't confront Ella right away. I needed time to process what I had just learned. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, like every part of my life had been a lie. I had forgiven her for one affair, believing that it was a single mistake. I had rebuilt my trust in her, only to find out that she had been deceiving me from the very beginning. The next morning, I sat down with Ella. I could tell she sensed something was wrong, even though we had barely spoken since the divorce proceedings started. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots, and slid it across the table to her. "Explain this," I said, my voice cold and steady. Ella looked down at the screen, her face paling as she realized what she was looking at. She didn't speak for a long time. I could see the panic in her eyes as she frantically tried to come up with something to say, but no words came out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. I didn't think you would find out." The admission felt like a punch to the gut. I had given her so many chances to come clean. I had asked her over and over again if there was anything else I needed to know, and she had lied to me every single time. All the therapy sessions, all the promises, all the tears, they had all been for nothing. It had all been a performance, designed to keep me from leaving her. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been lying to me?" Ella swallowed hard, tears streaming down her face. "It started 3 years ago, before the housewarming party. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It was ongoing. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to lose you." 3 years. 3 entire years of betrayal. My mind couldn't process it. Every memory I had of our marriage, every moment we had shared, was now tainted by this revelation. I thought about all the times we had laughed together, all the vacations we had taken, all the nights we had spent together, and I wondered how many of those moments had been real, and how many had been built on lies. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I packed a bag and left that afternoon, booking a room at a nearby hotel. I needed space, I needed air, I needed to get away from her. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved, had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a surge of anger and hurt. Over the next few days, I tried to come to terms with the reality of my situation. The divorce was still moving forward, but now I knew that I had been living with a stranger for years. I had been married to someone who had manipulated me, lied to me, and cheated on me over and over again, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. Ella tried to contact me several times, but I ignored her calls and messages. I couldn't bear to hear any more of her excuses, any more of her lies. I had already wasted enough time on her, and I wasn't going to give her any more of my life. One night, as I was sitting in the hotel room staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed with a new message. This time, it wasn't from Ella or Alice. It was from an unknown number. "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Bill's ex-wife, Alice's friend." My heart raced as I read the message. What now? What else was there that I didn't know? The message continued. "I've been talking to Alice, and she told me about everything that's happened with you and Ella. I think you deserve to know something. Bill wasn't the only one. Ella had another affair before him. I'm so sorry." I dropped the phone, my mind spinning. Another affair? Before Bill? What had my life become? Update 3. I sat frozen, staring at the message on my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. Another affair? Before Bill? I felt sick to my stomach. It was as if my entire reality had been shattered, and the pieces didn't even resemble what I thought my life had been. Ella had already destroyed me with her betrayal, and now there was even more. I didn't reply to the message right away. I didn't know if I wanted to know more. My mind was already reeling from the sheer weight of everything that had come to light. I kept wondering if knowing more would really change anything. The divorce was already in motion, and I had no intention of turning back. But the idea that Ella had been cheating for even longer, it was a thought I couldn't escape. The next morning, I woke up to several missed calls from Ella. She had been calling all night, and it only made me feel more nauseated. I wanted answers, but I wasn't sure I could handle hearing them from her. I ended up blocking her number. I couldn't take any more of her lies. Every word out of her mouth felt like poison. Instead, I reached out to Alice. She had been a surprising source of support throughout this nightmare. I sent her a message asking if she knew anything about what her friend had told me. She responded almost immediately. "I'm sorry you had to hear about it this way. I didn't want to overwhelm you with everything. But yes, I've known about it for a while. My friend didn't want to say anything at first, but when she found out what Ella had been doing with Bill, she felt guilty for not telling you." I asked Alice to connect me with her friend, the one who had sent the original message. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a new message from the same unknown number. This time, I was ready. "I'm really sorry for dropping that on you. I just thought you deserved to know the whole truth." I messaged back, asking for details. It took a few minutes for the response to come, and when it did, my stomach twisted in knots. Ella and I used to work together at the same company. I found out she was having an affair with another guy at work, even before she started with Bill. I didn't know all the details, but I know it went on for about 6 months. They would sneak off after work, meet up during lunch breaks. She was really good at covering her tracks, though. That's probably why you never found out. 6 months. Another 6 months of betrayal, before she even met Bill. I could hardly breathe. How could I have been so blind? How could she have hidden so much from me for so long? It felt like I was married to a complete stranger, someone who had spent years deceiving me while I lived in blissful ignorance. I thanked Alice's friend for telling me, and then sat in silence for a long time, trying to process everything. Ella's infidelity wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a pattern, a series of deliberate choices spanning years. This wasn't about one mistake or one bad decision. This was who she was. A cheater, a liar, someone who couldn't be trusted no matter how much therapy or remorse she showed. I knew what I had to do next. I had already filed for divorce, but I needed to make sure there was nothing left for her to hold on to. No contact, no more conversations, no more pleas for forgiveness. I needed to cut her out of my life completely. And I needed to confront her one last time to get the closure I desperately needed. That evening, I went back to the house. Ella was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, clearly surprised to see me. She stood up, her eyes swollen from crying, but I didn't feel any pity for her anymore. There was nothing left in me that wanted to comfort her, only anger. "I know about the other affair," I said, my voice cold and steady. Ella froze, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't even try to deny it this time. She knew the jig was up. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. "How many times have you lied to me? How many people have there been?" She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she held onto the edge of the table. "I never wanted you to find out about that," she whispered. "It was before Bill. It didn't mean anything." I let out a bitter laugh. "It didn't mean anything? You've been cheating on me for years, Ella. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This wasn't just Bill. This was you, over and over again, lying to my face. I didn't want to hurt you, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I was confused. I made mistakes, but I always loved you. Loved me? I repeated, my voice rising. You don't love me. You can't love someone and treat them like this. You've been lying to me for years. How many more affairs are there that I don't know about? She shook her head, her sobs growing louder. I swear, that's it. Just those two. It was a mistake. A mistake? I shouted, unable to control the rage bubbling up inside me. You've been lying for years, and you call it a mistake? You made a choice every single time. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to betray me. And now you're trying to play the victim? She didn't respond. She just sat there crying into her hands. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let her tears sway me. It was over. In the days that followed, I moved back into the house once Ella had moved out. The divorce was finalized within a few months, thanks to the post-nup. I got the house, the car, and the bulk of our assets. Ella left with little more than her clothes and a few personal items. It was more than she deserved, in my opinion. I never heard from her again after the divorce was finalized. She moved back to her hometown to be closer to her family, or so I heard from mutual acquaintances. I blocked her on all social media and deleted her number from my phone. I didn't want any reminders of the life I had shared with her. It took a long time to heal from the betrayal. Some days, it still hurts. But I'm moving on, slowly but surely. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the anger and trust issues that Ella left behind. It's not easy, but I'm determined to come out of this stronger. I've reconnected with old friends and started focusing on myself again. I'm not ready to date yet, but maybe someday I will be. For now, I'm just taking things one day at a time. Looking back, I realize now that I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. I should have left the first time she cheated. But hindsight is 20/20, and all I can do now is move forward and learn from my mistakes. I won't let anyone treat me like that again. And that's it. That's the end of my story. It's been a rough journey, but I'm finally free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, and the pain. And for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to feel like myself again. Thank you for reading, and for all the support along the way. It means more than you know.